Hello, everybody, and welcome into my 2023-2024 NBA preseason power rankings. I am so excited to bring you all this series. I apologize for the delay on the series. I've been a little sick for the past week or so I'm at the same time also apologizing for my voice. Still don't have my voice back to 100% yet, but feeling good enough, and I couldn't delay this any longer. We spent so much time getting the graphics ready for this series, watching film, and taking notes for this series. So I just want to get this series out to you guys as quick as we could. So I do appreciate you all for your patience and your support throughout this process as we get started with this series. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at my 30th ranked team, and that is the Portland Trailblazers, who have been the biggest pain in the butt to grade out of any team throughout this process so far. So we're going to have a ton of fun diving into this team. But before we get started, please do subscribe right here to the Front Office Show's YouTube channel and ring that post notification bell as well so you can stay up to date with this entire series. We're going to be counting down to the number one ranked team on my power rankings list before the start of the NBA regular season. And do me a big favor, leave a like as well on this video. Takes 2 seconds and really, pushes it out to the algorithm so other fans and more Blazer fans even can take a look at this video. I hope I do them well. They're going to be a little upset with this ranking, but I hope that regardless of your feelings on where your team is ranked, that you listen to the whole episode and I hope that my analysis is justifiable for my ranking of that team. Now, I'd like to mention just a couple of housekeeping rules, if you will, for this series. So every episode's going to have a similar, track list, if you will. We're going to do the intro where I kind of give my thoughts on the team before we dive in, brief thoughts. We're going to take a look at the rankings and where they are in a specific tier. Then we're going to take a look at their offseason moves, some additions and departures, their draft, where they are in terms of cap space and luxury tax space, if they're over or under it. Take a look at the team discussion. Take a look at the roster, how they grade out position by position and on both overall and as a defense. Take a look at some of the strengths and weaknesses, some of the Vegas odds, and in some episodes, like the Charlotte Hornets episode, which, spoiler alert, is coming up pretty soon, we'll have guests on for interviews at the end of these episodes where they'll come on and we'll have great discussions about the teams that they are fans of and or cover. In most cases, they also cover that team as well. So in those instances, you're going to want to make sure you stay around for the duration of the episode. Unfortunately, today's episode isn't one of those cases, but when we get those started up, there'll be a ton of fun for sure. But let's get started. And this Portland Trailblazers team, like I mentioned, is kind of a pain to analyze and grade because of the Damian Lillard rumors, right? Damian Lillard, I say about a month ago now, he requested a trade finally out of Portland after years of saying, I'm not going to run from the grind. The grind is, if I don't know what Damian Lillard's middle name is, but my middle name is the grind, or grind is my middle name, however the saying goes. But, finally, Damian Lillard requests a trade from Portland after a rough last season for the Portland Trailblazers team, but Damian Lillard quietly had one of the best offensive seasons that any point guard has ever had, averaging 30-plus points per game on insane volume, insane efficiency, and insane difficulty of shot diet, if that makes sense. And the Portland Trailblazers honestly might have got dealt a bad hand based off the timing of Damian Lillard's trade request because who knows what Portland does if Damian Lillard says, I don't know, on draft night, hey, I want to trade. Or if Damian Lillard says on July 1st, hey, I want a trade. Do they offer Jeremy Grant 5 years, $160 million? That is a legitimate question. But this is arguably the most important decision in franchise history. And the reason why I say this is the most important decision in franchise history, arguably, or process, if you will, it's because Damian Lillard is, if not the greatest, one of the Mount Rushmore players in Portland Trailblazer history. It's him, Bill Walton, Clyde Drexler, think of a fourth, maybe LaMarcus Aldridge, right? But my point is he's one of the greatest, if not the greatest, Portland Trailblazer of all time. And he's still, maybe not quite at his peak, but he's still arguably in his prime. So when you're dealing with a guy like that, you have to make sure you get the requisite haul for that. And they're not quite in a Washington Wizards situation, but it's similar to the point where if they had traded Damian Lillard, I don't know, 2 years ago, they probably would have gotten, and who knows what haul they get, but they probably get a Rudy Gobert type haul, which I don't know if they get that now. But I do know this. Damian Lillard is a really, really good player still in 2023. And he's such good of a player that I just had to grade the Blazers without Damian Lillard. I think he will get traded. And I'm fairly confident that in terms of players they get back in a Damian Lillard trade, I'm fairly confident that the Blazers will be dead last regardless of who they get back. I don't see them getting back like an all-star caliber player, which I think at this point is what would they need to push them above, one of these other teams at the bottom, right? So that's my thoughts on Damian Lillard. He's so good, like I mentioned. The Blazers are dead last without Damian Lillard, excuse me, and they are 21st with Damian Lillard. They would jump up 9 spots into 2 different tiers if they had Damian Lillard. They would jump from the rebuilding tier to the playoff hopeful tier, which I do think this team would have playoff in terms of organizational outlook. This team would have playoff aspirations if Damian Lillard was on the roster, because I think they built this roster to be a playoff team. But Damian Lillard say, hey, I want to trade, kind of uprooted those trades. And I mean, that wave of thinking. And I got to give, Joe Cronin, the Blazers general manager, a bit of credit for not biting on Damian Lillard saying, hey, I want to go to Miami when Miami's best option in terms of trade assets right now is player-wise, maybe Tyler Hero, who does have a ton of value, it seems, to NBA GMs or rival GMs, etc. And they don't have like the plethora of draft picks that a team like Brooklyn, for example, has, in my opinion. So I think smart Joe Cronin to wait the process out, be patient with this process. But I do think Damian Lillard will get traded before the start of the regular season, hence why the Blazers are ranked dead last in my power rankings. But let's start this thing off with a look into the offseason moves, some of their additions, departures, and what they were able to do in a crazy offseason. So start with the departures. Again, Damian Lillard, I'm adding this in here for replay value, I guess. I do think he gets traded eventually, but it's kind of tough. They traded Josh Hart at the deadline, but he played a ton for them last season. He's a really good player. He sticks around in New York. They lose Cam Reddish to the Lakers in free agency. He did some solid things for them last season. They did lose Drew Eubanks, however, in free agency. I want to say to the Phoenix Suns. That's a big loss, especially when you take a look at what they wind up doing in terms of their depth at the big spot. It is not pretty. And they do lose Justice Winslow. I think it's more of a name at this point. But there's your departures there for Portland. One name that isn't here for some reason, so error on my end, is Drew Eubanks. Not Drew Eubanks. Trendon Watford, who again, for anything more than just depth, I don't understand why they let him go. I don't really understand that. Maybe there's something I missed in my research, but really doesn't make a ton of sense to me, especially when we look at some of their big depth, which, like I mentioned, we'll talk about in a second. The additions, only draft guys. This will change when the Damian Lillard said trade does eventually happen. This list will grow. But for right now, it's only Scoot Henderson, which I don't know why I said only Scoot Henderson, because he is really freaking good. I'll talk about more of these guys as prospects just to get to the roster review. But holy cow, I love Scoot Henderson. The Blazers lucked up. This is like the Blazers honestly taking Greg Oden instead of Kevin Durant. And I'm not saying Brandon Miller is going to be Kevin Durant. Brandon Miller is going to be Greg Oden, but you get my analogy. Like, this is like what the Charlotte Hornets did. If I'm the Portland Trailblazers, thank you for giving me potentially a generational point guard, and why I think the Blazers are more reluctant. I'm not more reluctant, but more willing to listen to Damian Lillard trade offers, because you never want to say a guy's going to be, one of the greatest players of your or going to like compare him rather to maybe the greatest player your franchise has ever had, and somebody that's going to get a his jersey retired. It's not a statue made for him. That's how significant he is to your team and to your city in general. But we're sure we could trade Damian Lillard because we're that confident. We have another Damian Lillard on our team because that's how freaking good Scoot Henderson is. I don't understand Charlotte just passing up on him. Greg Oden, Kevin Durant 2.0, except it ends in a good scenario for the Trailblazers. Another scenario where with Chris Murray, where I don't know if they go with Chris Murray, if they know for certain they were trading Damian Lillard, because I think Chris Murray makes a ton of more sense for a team that's trying to win now, but needs like another cheap roster spot filled player that can actually play in the NBA right now. I think that's why I personally mocked Chris Murray a ton to teams like Golden State, to the Brooklyn Nets. I think I mocked him there a couple of times. The Sacramento Kings made a ton of sense for Chris Murray. The Memphis Grizzlies, if he somehow fell that far. So I don't know. Maybe the Trailblazers, excuse me, not the Timberwolves. Maybe the Blazers, they take more of a gamble on an upsidey traits-based prospect at 23. But they didn't. They take Chris Murray, good player. We'll talk about him more in a sec. And I love Ryan Rupert. I want to say with the 44th pick in the draft, incredible value there. Who's a guy that I think day one is going to be a really good defender at the NBA level. They are over the cap, but they are under the tax. So if they wanted to go give a non-taxpayer mid-level exception to Christian Wood, they could, for example. But, let's now dive into this team outlook and take a look at the roster and the grades position by position. And these are my grades. I spent a ton of time looking at some data and some film. So we're going to have a ton of fun with this. But let's start off with the offense, or just the team and the outlook in general. Damian Lillard, again, to finish the conversation around him, he's not the elite of the elite, because those guys are going to be like a pinkish, purplish type color, like a Jokic, for example. Whatever one tier below the elite of the elite is, that's what Damian Lillard is. Like I just said, he had one of the best offensive seasons out of any point guard ever. It's just not going to get talked about because the Portland Trailblazers sucked for the majority of last season. And the Blazers just were not good enough. And Damian Lillard, he did miss some games. I think he only played 58 games last season. So that does kind of, get his name brought up a little bit less. But don't get it twisted. Damian Lillard had an all-time caliber season last season. And he's a great player. Like I said, obviously, he jumps his team up 9 spots if he's on the roster right now. And he's not in this ranking because their backcourt's going to be Anthony Simons and Scoot Henderson in my eyes. And I'll start off with Anthony Simons. Look, I think Anthony Simons is a really skilled offensive player. I think he's a fine passer. I don't think he's a good finisher, or like his ability to finish through contact, especially. It's like Nick Smith Jr.-esque, like draft-wise. I don't know why that's the first name that came to my head, like to compare his finishing ability. But it's like Nick Smith Jr. in a way. But what guys like Anthony Simons and Nick Smith Jr., what they do a good job of is they do a great job of having an elite, maybe not elite, but a really good floater and or runner is the term like Synergy uses. But if you look at their runners / floater usage, they go to it a lot. And I think that's Anthony Simons' counter, especially when you play against drop coverage defenses. That's his counter to, as opposed to getting all the way to the rim. Now, that puts a cap on his offensive ceiling, where I think outside of maybe some efficiency tweaks, I think this is Anthony Simons as a player. Maybe one, I just don't see him being ever an all-star caliber player, which is why he's in this green, gets this green color, which means good. By the way, green means good. Blue means they're a stud, but not quite great or elite yet. Great / low tier elite is the bluish color we saw with Dame, and dark blue rather. And then the elite of the elite, which are like 4 or 5 players, is the purplish pink color. But Anthony Simons, he just isn't that yet. And I don't think he ever will be that, but he's a great find. I want to say a second round pick, but he just has some limitations in terms of his offensive ceiling because I don't think he's a high level playmaker. He doesn't do a great job getting to the rim, which honestly might be the reason why he's not a high level playmaker, quite honestly. Because when he comes off a ball screen, it's really just, for the most part, pull up jumper, or I'm going to hit that pocket pass in the drop coverage to Yusuf Nurkic, and the offense kind of stalls out. So I don't know. I like Anthony Simons. I just think there's a limit to his game. Scoot Henderson, my gosh. Like I already said earlier, I love Scoot Henderson. I think he is post Luka draft. So we're talking Zion, John Morant draft. We're talking LaMelo Ball, Anthony Edwards. We're talking Paulo, and we're talking this year. So I think that's 5 years. In the Cade Cunningham draft too. My bad. In that time span, he's the third best prospect in the past 5 years. It's Victor Wembanyama, it's Zion Williamson, and it's Scoot Henderson. And what he is able to do on a basketball floor is incredible. He is an elite level athlete. Not a Min Thompson level of freaky, but he is a really, really good athlete. I don't want to undersell Scoot Henderson at all. He is a elite level pick and roll partner or pick and roll player, excuse me. Something that I think he'll be really, really good at day one. And I think this might be my hottest take, but I'm willing to go on a limb and say I've never been this confident that an NBA draft prospect will be this good, or will, like I'm just so set and firm that Scoot Henderson is going to be a good NBA player. Like, bar injuries, I think Scoot Henderson is going to be a great NBA player. Like, I'm willing to bet any amount of money Scoot Henderson is going to be a good NBA player, because he also dominated against NBA level talent in the G League, which is why G League Ignite, it's so cool for these 17, 18-year-olds to essentially have the rookie moments, a dumbed down version of it, obviously, but to have some of these rookie mistakes and rookie moments against NBA level talent. Is it against LeBron James? No, but it is against legitimate NBA level guys. And Scoot Henderson was great at that. Scoot Henderson led an NBA level in terms of talent, locker room. He's a great leader. That's one of the biggest things that continuously got put out during the draft. Like, was how good of a leader he is. I think he has some off-ball upside. The shooting has to come around, but I think he's going to be a really, really good cutter. I'm a little more optimistic than some about his defensive abilities, which we'll talk about later. But I love Scoot Henderson. Slam dunk pick. Congratulations, Portland Trailblazers. You got your Kevin Durant, Greg Oden, right? They have Matisse Thybulle, just an average. If not, I think average might be like, he's not a good offensive player. The shooting comes around. He had some moments. I think he had the game against the Lakers where he hit like 5 of 7 from 3. If he can be a consistent 3-point shooter, that he's one of the better contracts and just a true 3-and-D guy in the league. Jeremy Grant, more of an offensive-oriented player, I think, at this stage of his game, but really, really solid. Can create a little bit, especially for himself. Has some post-up game, but I think he really is going to be able to flourish nicely next to the two guards they have in Scoot and Anthony Simons. And Nurkic. I think Nurkic is a really good role man. I think Nurkic is an elite level rebounder. I do really think that of your use of Nurkic, elite level rebounder on both ends, elite level offensive rebounder, elite level defensive rebounder. I think he's in the 96th percentile in terms of offensive rebounds per 75 possessions. So he's a really, really good rebounder. And I think that, he's going to be a good fit. He's going to be a good pick and roll partner next to Scoot Henderson and next to Anthony Simons, or even Shada Sharp off the bench. I'll talk about in just a sec. But I don't love using Nurkic post game, which is a big part of some of their offensive engines, which brings me to the coaching here in Portland with head coach Chauncey Billups, who I gotta admit, one of my worst takes. I thought he was gonna be a good head coach. I don't think he's a good coach, and he gets this like dirty yellow type color for his card. because I think he's in that bottom tier of coaching in the NBA. I really do believe that. I don't think he's a good NBA head coach. I think the offense is kind of meh, kind of bland and generic. They run a crap ton of zone. They are the second highest usage team in the NBA zone. They're the only team in the NBA, not in the Miami Heat, to run 10+% or more of their defensive possessions in zone. I don't think they're that spectacular. It's not like a Miami Heat version of zone. And then it's when you watch the Blazers ball screen defense, it's kind of like, we're trying to throw random crap at the wall and see what sticks, because they do a bit of everything, but it's not like they do a bit of everything in a good way to like mix it up and, confuse the defense. Confuse an opposing offense. We're gonna throw a bunch of everything at the wall because we don't have a real identity defensively. We're gonna hedge a little bit with Nurkic, which I will give Nurkic a bit of credit for, especially looking at the defense. We're gonna do a bit of everything. We're gonna throw out some hedging. We're gonna go some deep drop at times especially with Nurkic. We're gonna switch everything a ton, right? We're gonna do like there needs to be a bit of an identity there, and I just don't think this team has an identity defensively. They were one of the worst defensive teams in the NBA, which I think falls a lot on coaching, talent too, obviously. And then offensively, I just think it's a bunch of mess stuff that gets bailed out by having, again, your best player have one of the generational seasons from a point guard in Damian Lillard. And I think there's going to be some drop off with Anthony Simons and Scoot Henderson, although as I've already mentioned, I'm ridiculously high in the two. But let's get started with the depth here. And it's pretty disappointing depth, if you will. I don't even know if that's the right word. There's some upside here and some reasons to be optimistic for sure, but it's not great depth, especially when we look at those bigs. But the biggest reason for any optimism with the Portland Trailblazers depth is Shaedon Sharpe, who was the 8th overall pick. I want to say that was the pick at least in the 2022 draft. And just a freak athlete, ridiculous athlete. And that popped off on the little bit of tape he did have going into the draft, which, by the way, he was a really, really hard player to kind of evaluate coming out, because there literally was nothing that, he had. There was no tape on him. So you're kind of just going in there blindsided, not knowing, there was some tape you could look at, but it was really hard to see how it might translate. But shot 36% from three last season, really good cutter. I got to find his catch and shoot data, and I'll post that as a graphic in post for you all. But I'm super, super excited about Shaedon Sharpe. I think it's off-ball playability makes him a great fit next to a guy like a Scoot Henderson or Anthony Simons. And then Ryan Rupert, a guy that I talked about earlier, who I like a ton. I think I had him as a fringe first-round grade in this year's draft class. They both get the arrow trending upwards for me, both Shaedon Sharpe and Ryan Rupert, and then obviously Scoot. So 3 young guys all getting the arrow trending up, meaning that they're trending upward players in my eyes. And Ryan Rupert, in my opinion, I think he is going to be such a good NBA defender in the next couple of years. I think it's honestly kind of crazy. I think he might be a good NBA defender right now, and I'll talk more about his defense in a sec. But I think good slashing ability, good in transition. I think the 3-point upside is you gotta believe it, but I think he's gonna be a NBA player for a long time because I think he's athletic. I think he's a really good defender. The rest of the guard depth, yeah, Jonathan, I believe I'm pronouncing that right. Williams, who I think is just depth, honestly, G leaguer. And then Keon Johnson is kind of interesting still. Has some one-on-one upside, one-on-one self-creation upside. Has some shooting ability still, I guess. He grades out super well in every offensive category per B-ball index. just it hasn't fully come together yet. And if you look at his impact per 100 possessions, those actually don't grade out well, but there's some upside there. He's still super young. I like Keon Johnson. Dare I say the arrow might be trending upwards because he might get some actual playing time this year on a pretty bad Portland Trailblazers team. And like I said, their depth is pretty bad, to say the least. Look at their wings. The wing group I actually kind of like. Nazir Little is just a solid NBA player. I don't think he's ever lived up to the hype, but I think he's a solid NBA player who knows his role, good off-the-ball player offensively that can knock down open catch and shoot opportunities, that's still decently athletic and is, comparable on like the glass and a good finisher. Chris Murray, like I said, I'm actually super excited about him. I love the physicality that he plays with, especially his last year at Iowa. Super, super physical on the boards. Good knockdown, catch and shoot, 3-point threat. Pair him next to Scoot Henderson and as an off-ball threat on ball screens for Scoot. You're looking at something there. And then Jabari Walker, a guy that I really liked in last year's draft class, one of my guys and a sleeper of mine last year. He's another piece that I think they like here in Portland. That he was used more of as a helper off ball, and that's where he did a lot of his best stuff defensively. Getting weak side blocks where he's guarding the low man in the corner, and it's a opposite side drive, and he gets to beat it up at the rim. He uses his length super, super well in that department. I'll talk about it more when we get to the defensive side. But I like Jabari Walker. There is a arrow trending upwards for him as well because I do like him a ton. Just got to get more opportunity, I think. And then you have like probably the worst backup big depth in the NBA, John Butler, who, I mean, if you squint hard enough, I guess you can see the upside. He's a super lengthy dude that is super confident in his three-point jumper, weirdly, but is it good at it, if that makes sense? And it's an all right finisher, I believe. I suppose, not I believe, but I think the real, hope for your backup big spot is Abu Abaji. I believe I pronounced that correctly. Insane wingspan. He's like 7'8" wingspan. I believe he's 7 foot. Really good finisher. Could be a potential lob threat next to Scoot and next to Anthony Simons, Shane Sharp. I think that's probably your best bet. I think that's what they're banking on maybe for depth for the backup big spot. But regardless, it's two major question marks with John Butler and Adu Abaji. Now, if you look at the defense, let's start off where they rank. They're tier 5 for me, which is concerning. So they're in the bottom 4 to 5 teams in the NBA in terms of defense. Bottom 5. Like I said, Chauncey Billups is a great defensive mind, in my opinion. The only optimism for this defense is Matisse Thybulle. He is being used more as a wing stopper, so the best wing matchup, he's there to get it for you. And he's a top 10 wing stopper in the NBA. Maybe I'm selling him short because there are a ton of great wing defenders in the NBA, but navigate ball screens, he's your man. Perimeter one-on-one defense, he's your guy. And he's really, really good at it. Matisse Thybulle is this defense, or the only optimism, to be completely honest, with this defense. But it's not enough to save this defense from being in that tier 5 of being concerning defenses. Because like I mentioned, it's just not good enough to, one, get them out of this. And two, you don't have elite defenses or very rarely will you have an elite defense surrounded by one on-ball perimeter defender. Most of the time, you can get away with having an elite defense with an elite rim protector and pretty bad perimeter defenders. Look at the Utah Jazz with Rudy Gobert, where his best perimeter defender in his prime in Utah was Royce O'Neal. Those Utah Jazz teams never really had elite perimeter defenders. They had an elite rim protector who you could just funnel everything into, and he could beat it up at the rim. Portland Trailblazers don't have that. Nurkic had a career year in terms of his rim deterrence and how well teams shoot at the rim when he's there. He had a career year there, but I think that's to be expected because of the scheme. They had him a ton in a severely heavy drop, but that just caps your defense because if you're facing a team like, for example, the Los Angeles Clippers would kill them with this because it's Paul George and Kawhi Leonard coming off ball screens. Any team with a good pull-up jump shooter off of ball screens, like, I'm sorry, but if Scoot Henderson's guarding a ball screen, for an example, and Yusuf Nurkic is in a deep drop below the free throw line, he's cooked. And that is a wide open pull-up three for, I don't know, Steph Curry. Just bad. And you're kind of setting this defense up to fail. If you look at some of the depth, like I mentioned, Ryan Rupert, probably the second best defensive player on this roster. Probably he is the second best defensive player, in my opinion, on this roster. Hence why he's graded out as a green, meaning a really good defensive player. Yusuf Nurkic is fine. I think he doesn't do well in the post. I think you could really just vertically attack him. And if you have a great vertical threat, I don't like his odds there. He moves decently well, which is why they can hedge, do some more, in air quotes, creative things defensively in terms of their ball screen coverage. But he's just fine. Jeremy Grant at this stage of his career is just fine defensively. He does some things nicely for him as a helper or as a point of attack guy. He's just not really good at it. He's average, I guess, defensively. I think Scoot Henderson has the size. I think he has the body type to be a good NBA defender potentially if he locks in on that end of the floor. But I think Scoot and Anthony Simons are too small in terms of your backcourt. I don't think Anthony Simons and Scoot leads to a championship defense. And I think Anthony Simons, if he's your worst defender on a good defense, you're more than fine with it. Like put Anthony Simons at the 1, for example, and you got, I don't know, Jaden McDaniel. That might be a little draft, but you get my point. Like Jaden McDaniels. So just 3 really good wing defenders and a good big defender. You could win with that, right? You can't win with this. I think Anthony Simons, what they asked him to do last year, is just unfair to him defensively because they would have Anthony Simons, get the task of these bigger 2 guards because it would be him and Damian Lillard in the backcourt, and they didn't want Dame to have to guard Paul George for 20 possessions or whatever and go score 30 because that's not really fair to Dame. So they had Anthony Simons do it. And because Anthony Simons had to do that, he got torched in a lot of cases. I think he competes defensively. I just think he's too small, and I think you really could just use your body on him. I think he's in an unfavorable spot. But again, if he's your worst defender on a really good defense, I think you're fine with that. Shaedon Sharpe, I think, again, he has all the athletic traits. I just don't think he's good right now. Chris Murray and Jabari Walker in their roles, I think, are really, really interesting. I think Chris Murray has some ability to guard in space, which I'm really intrigued about. Jabari Walker defensively, I think where he was used best last year was as a helper, like I said earlier, off the ball, where he gets to just challenge things at the rim. Not the best in keeping up in space, but I think there is still, especially with some bigger wings, I think there is some potential there. From your bigs, I think that John Butler is, the way they use him is super unique because they don't use him as a big, especially defensively. Defensively, with John Butler, I think, or just in general, I think they want to play more 5 out with John Butler. And I think with John Butler, I think it's, like I said, if you squint, I see the upside. I see the potential of the Portland Trailblazers might see in him. But I just think right now, because look, he's a super lengthy, all right athlete. And I don't know his wingspan, but again, he's just a freak in terms of his length and therefore his size too. He's like 6'11" with an insane wingspan. But he's not the quickest on his feet. He really needs to improve his foot speed. And he's not the most physically built either. So when they try to go this 5 out, kind of like switch everything defense, John Butler's guarding a wing. If you put him on a wing, he's not like, there were moments we had to guard Kawhi Leonard late in the season on twitches. And Kawhi Leonard is just so physically strong that John Butler switches on to Kawhi Leonard, and Kawhi Leonard's just going to bully John Butler and put him in the cup. You switch out onto a guard, he's not quick enough on his feet, dare I say, nobody is, to guard a Steph Curry in space. And then against opposing bigs, it's not there either. Now, again, insane wingspan, insane length to where his recovery's solid. To where I think, honestly, his best spot might just be as a helper, because I don't think you want him on the ball, and I don't think you want him as like a big either in terms of I'm going to be a drop big or whatever. So, I don't know. John Butler defensively is just super, super weird, and I don't know what to do with them. Again, I guess in theory, if you want to keep with the switchiness, then just bulk up so that you can at least guard the bigger wings and we'll switch that way. But I don't know. I was just not impressed when I watched the film. I thought there were some massive holes there. I just think Bo Baji is just super raw as an athlete. I just know how much you want to rely on him. So the Portland Trailblazers, you look at some of their like their Vegas odds, plus 25,000 to win an NBA championship, plus 13,000 conference finals odds, plus 15,000 for them to win the division, the Northwest division with the Nuggets, Jazz, Thunder, and Timberwolves. Nuggets, Jazz, Thunder, Timberwolves. And they don't even have an over-under right now because I think Vegas is waiting on the Damian Lillard trade to go down. But let's take a look at some of the strengths and weaknesses, and then we'll get out of here. I think the biggest strength on this team right now is Scoot Henderson. Like I said, transcendent prospect who I think the Blazers lucked into getting, and good for them. This is, again, they're the good version. If they did Kevin Durant instead of Greg Oden, like this is that for them, right? I think the backcourt depth might be a strength or just the backcourt in general, because like I said, Scoot, Anthony Simon, Shannon Sharp, I like Ryan Repair. I think Keon Johnson has some potential still. And then I'm going to say the franchise direction is a strength. Granted, they might have lucked into this also because Damian Lillard said, fine, I'll be the one that, breaks up here. This is a very toxic relationship. I'll be the better person and break up and, sign the divorce papers or whatever. But I really do like the direction now because I think, like I said, Joe Cronin is being very patient with this. I think they have their next future franchise cornerstone. So I'm going to say that's the strength. Maybe that's not the best argument, but there you go. Weaknesses, I do think the coaching with Chauncey Billups is a major weakness. And I think long-term, if they're going to have any success, unfortunately, I think it's going to be without Chauncey. I think the defense is a massive concern. Like I don't love their defense at all outside of Matisse Thybulle, and I think they just don't have an identity. I very firmly believe this would have been the worst defense in the NBA by far, and they're still in that same tier. But it would have been a debate if they had let Matisse Thybulle walk away to Dallas. And then I think the big depth is also a massive concern. Abu Baji has some, tradesy tools and some upside, but he's super raw. And then John Butler, like I mentioned, I'm not a believer in John Butler. So, I mean, you got to hope that Nurkic stays healthy, because if not, you're looking at the worst starting big in the NBA. And then I think the perimeter shooting, if you lose Damian Lillard, is a concern. While I'm a believer in Scoot Henderson's jumper long-term, I'm not quite sure how good it is year one, which means your perimeter shooting is really, especially with guards, it's Anthony Simons and I guess Shaedon Sharp, Jeremy Grant, Nasir Little, Chris Murray. But that's 4 dudes that you could trust to shoot jumpers consistently. And that's just not quite ideal for the Blazers. So thank you all so much for tuning into this episode. I appreciate you for listening, and I'll try to get my voice back to 100% for the next episode of this Power Ranking series. Please do leave a like and subscribe. Till next time, stay safe and see ya.